It is a Friday afternoon, and that means it is Facebook Live Friday. Brian Milam, and that is Alex Walker. He is, as you could tell, he's not dressed. Hey, there he is. Hey, he disappeared over there. We got back from Hoover, Alabama, and the SEC football media days last night. As you can tell, he's not working today. And he's been out early this morning
shooting football
interviews and whatnot. But let's just jump into it. UK football, SEC football, your first time going to the SEC Media Day in Hoover. What was it like for you?
It was neat. It's certainly the mecca of college football, right? I mean, I've never been to a media days where the fans come. So that was kind of fascinating to me that all these different fan groups were coming from all over the South to be there. Kentucky fans were there, a couple of them. Supposedly, according to Pat Forty, he's been going there a long time, has never seen Kentucky fans there. So that kind of is a testament to the rise of the program here in Lexington. But my one regret is that I didn't get to see the dude from Alabama wearing the big ring hat that you're a big fan of. So didn't get to see that. But outside of that, very cool experience.
But you did see the Auburn dog as a tiger.
Yeah, there's this little dog about this big that this guy paints like the Auburn tiger, and I felt so bad for that dog. It's like looking at you like, why? Why does this guy own me?
Oh, goodness. But we're going to take your questions and any comments you might have on Facebook Live. We will try to answer those over the next 10, 15 minutes or so. We'd like to hear what you think. Who's going to win the SEC? What kind of season is Kentucky going to have? Is 6 wins. That's what they've been projected as by a lot of the national/regional media. Is that too many, too few, about right? We want to hear from you and what you think. And I think personally, just to kind of jump into that category, I think 6 wins from a team that won 10, even though, yeah, you have a lot of question marks. What team doesn't have a lot of question marks? I mean, Alabama, if you listen to Nick Saban, he goes, we're the worst team of all time, you know. And Vandy thinks they're disrespected. Kentucky's disrespected. Georgia is picked to do this. I think right now 6 wins is a little under what I would think for Kentucky, and I'm not wearing a Big Blue fan hat either. I think this is a club that could win 7. I think at the most could win 9. And I think personally 7, 8 if you get a little help somewhere.
And you look at the team just from a nuts and bolts perspective, their strength, the offensive line is once again going to be experienced. It's going to be a veteran group. It's going to be a group that could protect a quarterback in Terry Wilson who spent most of last year hurt. Now that he's healthy, they can protect him and allow that offense to operate. And at quarterback, Terry Wilson, if he can make the leaps in the bounds we expect him to make from a confidence perspective, that's a good thing. And it's not like when Benny Snell leaves, the cupboard's bare.
Right.
Smoke, A.J. Rose, Chris Rodriguez, they have tons of backs that are ready to make their impact in the SEC. On the defense, yeah, they lose a lot of pieces. Most of their secondary, Josh Allen, of course. But, man, they have a lot of young talent. Devontae Robinson, Chris Oakes, DeAndre Square from last year that already proved they can compete in the SEC and compete well. So the cupboard is not bare. And I think this team could certainly win 8, at max 9 games.
And I think that it is Kentucky. It is what John Calipari calls the Kentucky effect on the positive side. I think when you say the Kentucky effect on football, it's automatically, well, it's Kentucky.
Yep.
You know, and I understand after 5 decades of watching a team have a great season and then be subpar for 5 or 6, have a good season, another good season, and then step back again. I understand, but I also understand what Rich Brooks had started 15 years ago, I guess. And I see the same thing happening with Mark Stoops. It took Rich Brooks coming out of a probationary period from the NCAA. Hey, you're on probation a couple of years. You can't do this and this and this. I think people forgot that. I think people forget just how tough it was for Mark Stoops coming in. And he looked at this thing going, what do I have here? I've got Bud Dupree, I've got maybe one guy here. This is not a good ball club. And it has taken a short amount of time, especially by Kentucky standards, to turn this team into a Citrus Bowl winner, a 10-game winner, a first-round pick, top 7 pick winner. And I really believe that Kentucky, if they get a right break, I think you could have that 8-9 win season. Very, very possibly. Some of the people on Facebook, Gladys Benedict, I called you out, Gladys, sorry. How many wins? She goes, lots, and then says 5. I said, well, that's not enough. A lot of people say 8. There's an 11-1 in there. That would be outstanding. Donald says 6. So, we'll wait and see. It's still way too early because a lot can happen.
Of course, and we'll certainly see early on what Kentucky looks like. And let's just look purely at the schedule, because a lot of times it boils down to the matchups and who you're playing at home, who you're playing on the road, obviously. In the SEC East, South Carolina is one of the teams picked ahead of Kentucky in the conference. South Carolina has arguably the most difficult schedule in the country. And they're somehow picked above a Kentucky team that has beaten them, 5 times in a row now?
Yep.
So you look at the people voting on this. Obviously, everyone has different opinions, but it baffles me that Kentucky, once again, is picked to finish 6th in the SEC East, ahead of only Vanderbilt, which we knew Vanderbilt we picked to finish 7th in that side. But from a conference perspective, from a schedule perspective, let's break down game by game and kind of look at what Kentucky's dealing with. Because first impressions, when I looked at the schedule when it came out, there is plenty of room for Kentucky to once again have a really impressive season. You look week 1, August 31st, I believe, last day of August. You open up against Toledo. The MAC can always give you troubles, but let's chalk it up as a win. Toledo, I don't think anyone's picking Kentucky to lay an egg in the rope.
You better win the first 2.
Yeah, Eastern Michigan.
Citrus Bowl, you better
correct.
win.
Eastern Michigan, they're improving as a program, but 2-0. That big one's Florida. You have Florida at home. It's a night game. Mark Stoops was talking yesterday in Hoover. I'm so glad I finally can stop answering the Florida question. And some guy still asked about Florida. And Mark was like, did you not see what we did in Gainesville last year? Because we beat.
By double digits?
So he finally gets to stop answering the Florida question. So let's say you beat Florida and you start 3-0, which is very feasible. Florida, Felipe Franks, they still haven't proven that they're one of the upper echelon teams in the SEC. After that, it obviously picks up steam. Week 4 at Mississippi State in Starkville. In my opinion, you look at that as a loss.
There's a lot of cowbell going to be coming to UK that night.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yes.
That's a good ball club.
Take the Tylenol, because that's annoying, first of all.
Earplugs, Tylenol, and you'll be good.
And so let's say Mississippi State. This is just me. We can go you next. I say Toledo win, EMU win, Florida win, 3-0. At Mississippi State, 3-1. At South Carolina is at a point with Will Muschamp where they need to make that next step. And when they're trying to take that next step, Kentucky, in their eyes, is a game they have to win. Eventually, when you beat a team 5 times in a row, eventually the other team's going to get you back, right? I think this is the year the Gamecocks do get Kentucky back. So let's look at 3-2. You get Arkansas next. Arkansas at home. Arkansas under Chad Morris, they were awful last year, which is going to happen.
They were really bad.
They're really bad. So I don't think they're going to take enough of a significant step this year to make anything happen. So let's say 4-2 at Georgia.
Odds are you're not going to be winning it.
Georgia's the odds-on favorite to win the SEC East. They were picked to win the SEC East. I think Georgia beats them 4-3. They're still in a good spot, right? They follow that with 2 consecutive home games against Missouri and Tennessee. You got to beat Missouri, at home especially. And then Tennessee, that's kind of that big toss-up game that if they beat Tennessee to go to 6-3 with games against Vandy, UT Martin, and Louisville, that can really start picking up steam. But if you lose to Tennessee, then it's like, how can that impact your season?
There are the games everybody looks at, and I know, again, I don't like doing this in July because so much can happen next week or by media day in 2 Friday, or what's that, next week or 2 Fridays from now, whenever. A lot can happen. But when you look at that schedule, there are 3 make or break games. And I think Florida could be one. I mean, you have to beat Florida. But also South Carolina, you got to keep that wheel rolling. And then another, I think, is Missouri. Missouri, you escaped last year on the road. You win those 3 games, and then what do you do with Tennessee? At some point, you have to beat Tennessee more than just once every 30 years and then beat them. Oh, yeah, then we beat them about 3 or 4 years later, and then you lay an egg in Knoxville like last year. That was maybe the worst UK performance I've seen in a long time. Tennessee should roll in here. Kentucky should be all guns blazing, ready to go. So I think there's possibly 4 games. Mississippi State game, I don't know if UK had the Archangels with them that they're going to go down there to Starkville, beat that team. I think, and he's the Penn State guy, and Mississippi State grabbed the Penn State.
Tommy Stevens.
And they, a lot about those guys. But Mississippi State is a team that I think could be the sleeper of the SEC, or at least one of them. But I think Florida, South Carolina, you got to beat Arkansas. Missouri, and let's just put Tennessee. So those 4 games that could shift either way could determine if we're talking about a 7-win season, or are we talking about a 9-win season, or I won't say double digits.
And this is a front-loaded schedule, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you got Florida, Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Georgia all in your first 7 games. Your final 5 games are Missouri and Tennessee at home, at Vanderbilt, home versus Tennessee Martin out of the OVC, home versus Louisville. Remember also, 8 home games this year. That's another big thing.
Love home games.
When you have 8 home games, I mean, that's just another chance. You should be winning most of those games. So it's another chance. It is. If Kentucky had South Carolina's schedule, I could see 5-7. I could see 6-6. I mean, South Carolina is playing Clemson. They have a couple teams in the West that are just brutally tough. They have a big chunk of games where they're just playing really good teams. Our non-conference has Clemson and Appalachian State. So I think Kentucky has a chance. And like you said, you don't like talking about this in July. It makes sense because let's say there's a freak accident to a big skill player. I'm not saying it's Terry, but last year we saw Landon Young go down, and that impacted the offensive line a little bit. Let's say a running back gets hurt or a big piece of the linebacker core. You just don't know.
Sure.
But like you said, there are those make or break moments. Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, that can kind of shift the momentum of the season and really put Kentucky in a position to once again win 8 to 9 games.
Let's real quick talk about. Let's discuss some of the players, the individual positions for Kentucky. Everybody looks at Terry Wilson. Let's just start on offense because offense is what everybody likes to talk about, especially when you're scoring points. What kind of impact is he going to have in year number 2? People forget last year, folks, he had never taken a varsity snap on the field. He had done practice. He had done all that stuff. He had not been on the field. I think he did pretty well for a guy who has never played Division I football before. And as Mark Stoops said, he led his team to 10 wins. Did the defense have a huge role to play in that? Certainly. Did Benny Snell have a huge role to play in that? Certainly. Now, the 3 running backs and Terry. So you've got a quarterback with 1 year under his belt. A.J. Rose, who's an explosive speed guy. Then you have Rodriguez, who is just a small tank ready to plow people, and then maybe the best name in the history of Kentucky football, Cavassier Smoke. Yeah, Cavassier. And I think that those 4 guys in the backfield, I can't wait to see what they do because there's a lot of speed, there's a lot of athleticism, and I would not be surprised to see another ground and pound type of attack the way we saw last year. Not with 1 running back, but with 3 running backs.
3 running backs that have 3 distinct styles, too. And we saw that a little bit last year with Benny and A.J. And how many times last year did we see A.J. get the rock? And it seemed like every time he touched it, he did something special. So I think when A.J. steps into the presumed starting role in Week 1 against Toledo, that he'll have the chance to prove, look, I know Benny's my guy, he's my teammate, but I have a lot to prove. And when you take him out, we saw Smoke towards the second half of the season, especially in that Louisville game, do some incredible things. And we saw Chris Rodriguez also early in the season in some of those early season games. Against Murray State especially, got 3, 4, 5 guys with him. And so what it boils down to on offense, you have plenty of skill position players that are talented. Obviously, Lynn Bowden, throw him in there to get him the ball in any situation possible. It boils down to the offensive line. They have so much veteran leadership on that side of the ball. And when you have a guy like Logan Stenberg, Landon Young returning from injury, that offensive line sets up everything. And it gives Terry time to get the ball to his playmakers. And he's one himself, remember. And we can go from there. And 2 other points real quick on offense. I'm blanking on Sawyer Smith. I think that was a big addition for Kentucky in the offseason to get him because it allows Terry to use his feet a little bit more. If they did not have a able-bodied quarterback, a proven winner at a impressive level down there in the Sun Belt, if they don't have a guy like that, you got to think Eddie Grant's telling Terry, look, don't run it as much. If you're hurt, we're done. But now he's a little more freedom, I think, to use his body and to go out there and make plays without that fear of ruining a season if he goes down. Because Sawyer, I think, if he did have to step in at any point, could be productive. As for Lynn, we did learn yesterday, by the way, if you're into looking at depth charts, David Bouvier last year returning punts. Lynn was doing kicks, I believe. Yeah. This year, Lynn Bowden will return both kicks and punts, which makes me excited just because anytime Lynn touches the ball is a good thing for Kentucky because he can score in a heartbeat.
You know, one thing about a punt returner, in my opinion, you want to get some positive yards. If you can get 7 or 8, 10 yards out on a punt return consistently, hey, that's spectacular. One thing with Lynn as a punt returner, I don't want to see him get crunched. It's okay for you. All you want to do is catch the football, make sure there's a possession there. But on kickoff return, he had one called back. It was about a 90-plus yard kickoff return that was called back on a penalty. He has such explosive skills. That guy is money. And guess what, folks? You get to see him for a couple more years. I mean, this is a guy who can be a game changer. And back quickly to the running backs. Benny was the guy, and he was a smaller guy, very strong, but you didn't see him break away on too many runs. He had a couple. A.J. Rose has breakaway speed. Cavassier Smoke has breakaway speed. Rodriguez will, to use a boxing term, will go to the body at length. And you have a lot of guys now, I think, could also, A.J. can catch it out of the backfield. We didn't see Benny Snell catch the ball out of the backfield too much. There was not that safety valve for Terry Wilson, the way Hal Mumme used to use a running back just to float him out to the flat. And if nothing is there, dump it off. Let's see what happens. I think there's going to be a little bit more speed on offense, and yes, it does deal with the offensive line some. Now, quickly to defense, very quickly. I would not know where to start if I was a defensive coordinator, if I was Mark Stoops, when you look at all of the places that you have to fill. There is no Josh Allen. There's no secondary returning. Devontae Robinson, you mentioned earlier, from Henry Clay. But guys and ladies of the Big Blue Nation, there are some backups from last year who we got glimpses of. And if those glimpses can become consistent, Josh Paschal will return, a healthy Josh Paschal, who is reminds me a little bit of Micah Johnson from years ago. Wears the same number and everything. But we saw Oates get some sacks in there, and Square. I really think the defense, maybe by week 3 or 4, and from that point on, could just be the best kept secret in at least the SEC East.
And Marquan McCall out of Detroit, another guy that didn't have a chance to quite step in last year. And Cash Daniel made the point in Hoover that just because you don't know their names yet doesn't mean they're talented. He's like, look, Kentucky in years past, they rebuild frequently. Not now. Mark Stoops has had consecutive recruiting classes with tons of talent, tons of rich talent that can step in and play right away. This team is reloading, and there's a bunch of, like you said, backups on the defense that I think will learn their names very quickly and who are going to be the impact players this year in the SEC.
Jamie Prophet says, I wish they would ban those darn cowbells. That's pretty funny. A lot of people think 8-4. There's some 7-5s in there. 8-4 with a bowl win. There's some 10-2 records. For those of you who have been on Facebook, we appreciate the feedback.
And real quick, in terms of, we obviously gave our predictions. My guess is 8. I think 8 is a great season for Kentucky this year. Yours was?
I think I see 8. I will reevaluate once we get to see them practice a little bit. Once that first game, I want to see how they perform in the first 2 games just to get some rhythm to them. Because you're going to see some new faces that have to get some in-game reps.
I think we'll learn early, what kind of vibe do we see with Kentucky? I mean, are they going to be a team that's going to chase that 8-9 win total again? Paul Feinbaum, I spoke to him yesterday. He said Kentucky has been, he used the quote, completely and utterly disrespected in the offseason. And said that he thinks they can also win 8 to 9 games, saying that Mark Stoops is still one of the most underrated, undervalued coaches in the country. So that's good from Paul Feinbaum. He's a guy that typically what he says is pretty close to what ends up being fact later in the season. So we think 8-ish. Here's what the rest of the media thought. Every media member attending SEC Media Days voted on their projected order of finish. Real quick, in the SEC East, Georgia, number 1, followed by Florida, Missouri, South Carolina, Tennessee, and then Kentucky, followed by Vanderbilt. So Kentucky has been picked to finish 6th in the SEC East, behind a South Carolina team they'd beaten 5 times in a row, behind a Missouri team they beat last year on the road, and behind a Tennessee team that they're projecting to make big leaps and bounds under Jeremy Pruitt, which I could see happening. As for the Western side, Alabama, in a shocking projection, has been picked to finish first in the SEC West. Goodness. Followed by LSU, Alabama, followed by Texas A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. And every time I look at the SEC West, you just be thankful as a Kentucky fan that you're not on that side, because goodness.
It used to be thankful. You wish you were in the SEC West when Alabama was not this Nick Saban Alabama, and now it's kind of like after you get past the top 2 of the SEC East with that Georgia-Florida line, and then you get everybody else. It is kind of good to be in the East right now because we've seen Florida struggle, we've seen Tennessee struggle, South Carolina is on the ropes a little bit, Kentucky is rising, so maybe this is another chance where it could come down to a game late in the year like it did with Kentucky and Georgia at Kroger Field with all of the marbles on the line, so to speak, because Cash Daniel did say one thing. He said, what's the point of winning 10 if you just say, well, we're going to win 6 or 7? He wants to get to Atlanta. Kentucky wants to get to Atlanta. And if Mark Stoops can take the Wildcats to that location in December, my gosh, that would be a lot of fun. We're going to wrap up this Facebook Live. We've got to get some TV work in a little bit. It's 3:30. For Alex Walker, I'm Brian Milam. We will see you next Friday afternoon.